Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Good morning, everyone. Happy 2018. After 4 programs of pre-recorded programs, we are here live from Phoenix, Arizona. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. A new year to address important issues. Just as a reminder, this is a platform. This is an AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection platform. And our goal is to educate on many relevant issues to Hispanic Latinos in Arizona. We also would like to celebrate accomplishments. There's just too many accomplishments from Latinos in our state. And the third is we would love to connect Hispanics from all generations here in our state. So this is the objectives of our program. We've addressed many issues in 2017, and the name of the show today is Legislative Priorities 2018. And we have guests that I'll be introducing as we move on. Just as a reminder, this is a program, a radio show, but we also do Facebook Live. Every program is Facebook Live, and this is not the exception. You can join the Facebook Lives at our Facebook page, AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We also have podcasts. You can find us on the iPhones and also on Android phones, and look for AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, because we do archive all our shows. Today, again, it's Legislative Priorities 2018. We are going to be connecting with Linda Vitale shortly. Before that, I would like to read just a couple of lines that I wrote before coming here. I'll read them later. Let me just paraphrase. In any country, what happens at the in legislation shapes the country. That's where things are passed, where laws are passed, and that literally affects the life of the country. We've heard a lot that elections have consequences. And what happens in D.C. does not stay in D.C. So one of the things that I believe in democracy, it's very, very important, is that citizens get involved. And in as much as citizens get involved in democracy, in the legislative process, that's what's going to make the democracy work better. And if we do not, then elections have consequences either way. So basically, I'm paraphrasing the lines that I wrote, and just to highlight how critical it is what happens in Congress, how critical it is what happens at the state legislature. And I believe we are all becoming more aware of this reality, and hopefully that would lead us all to become more engaged. In today's issue, Legislative Priorities 2018, we are joined by Steve Jennings and Dan Martinez. Dan Martinez is the state president of AARP Arizona. And Dan, happy 2018 and very welcome to our show.
Thank you, David. I'm glad to be here. What I would add to your comments is that in addition to citizens being involved, they need to be registered to vote and to exercise that privilege, because that's really what makes the world go round in terms of legislation. The people that we elect, they are the ones that are empowered to do what citizens prefer that they do.
Thank you, and welcome again. Steve Jennings is the Advocacy Director for AARP in Arizona, and we're expecting Lupe Solis to join us shortly. And I was driving to the studio and thinking that the three of you are mentors to me, and I really thank you for all that you do, and the example that you have set forth for many of us and for me personally. So thank you very much, and Steve, welcome to our program today.
Thank you, David. Great to be here again.
Great. Okay, the first item that we would like to touch in legislative priorities is that, as we know, our President Donald Trump signed or passed a tax bill. We cannot even call it tax cuts for everyone. And I am joined, we are going to be joined, and I believe Linda Vitale is already on the phone. And Linda, thank you so much for joining our program. First of all, welcome and happy 2018 to you.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning. You are a volunteer with the AARP on your spare time, but you still work and you are a tax preparer. Would you help us understand what are the major changes in the new law, the tax plan that the administration just recently passed?
Well, the main changes are that we have new tax rates. We have a different way of calculating the standard deduction. It's been almost doubled. The child tax credit has been doubled. But also the exemptions that people were able to be taken, per person. Everyone was entitled to one exemption per person on the tax return is gone. So they did increase the standard deduction quite a bit, but they took away the exemption. And then the other big issue, of course, was the fact that they took away the penalty for the individual mandate for health insurance.
Got it. Does this mean that we are going to end up with a little bit more money on a weekly basis every paycheck?
Well, that's the claim. And they actually just did come out with, the IRS just came out with a new withholding calculation that will start in February. People should start seeing them in their paychecks during February, the month of February, that the withholding will be, changed accordingly so that you're not overpaying in your taxes. So therefore, most people's paychecks should see a little bit of reduction in their withholding from the actual federal tax withholding.
And just briefly, Linda, explain to us what is the standard deduction?
Okay, the standard deduction is everyone is entitled to a standard deduction on the tax return, and it goes by your filing status. So if you're single, your standard deduction, for example, for 2017 tax year is $6,350. And then if you're married filing joint, it's twice that, because one for the husband and one for the wife. So that is something that comes right off your taxable income. It's a subtraction from whatever your taxable income is. And so that lowers your tax liability by that amount. And right now, the new standard deduction for 2018 for a single person is $12,000, and for a married filing jointly person, it's $24,000. So basically, that gets lobbed off your taxable income. You don't pay taxes, in other words, on your first $12,000 if you're single, or your first $24,000 if you're filing joint on your taxes.
Got it. So this would be reflected, especially the change on standard deduction, when we file taxes next year for 2018. Correct?
Correct. Yes, correct.
Got it.
So they've changed the standard deduction amount, but keep in mind that everyone on a tax return, including husband, wife, and children, each were entitled to an exemption credit. And the exemption credit is $4,050 per person. So, for an example, a family of four, a husband and wife and two children, have lost an exemption for each of those four people. So you've basically lost $16,600 lobbed off your income because there are no more exemptions as of next year. You can't take any. So, yes, they increased the standard deduction, but they took away the exemption credit.
So that
on the tax return.
So the amount that we were going to keep might not be the whole amount.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated, but basically you were always entitled to two deductions against your taxable income, your standard deduction and then your exemptions per person
Right.
on your tax return. So as I said, a family of four, that would be $16,600 lobbed off their taxes, off their taxable income. It's gone now as of 2018.
Linda, thank you so very much for making time to join our program. Thanks very, very much, and have a great day.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Before we continue, Lupe Solis is here with us. Happy 2018 and welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad
All
to be
right.
here.
Okay. So now, Steve, help us understand here, because there's with budget there's all kinds of rules, correct? And there is something called the bird rules and the pay-go rules. And I know these are kind of complicated things, but I believe you can help us understand. And these were kind of triggered by the deficit that the tax cuts are going to generate. And that deficit is about $1.5 trillion.
Yes, that's right. And, there's an old saying in the legislative setting is that you can pass all the bills that you want to, but the meat of the federal Congress or the state legislature is the budget. And so it's the really important thing. It runs all the things that the government does, the military, the highways, the health care. It's all tied to the budget. And, we've been spending more than we've been bringing in for many years now, and there's an accumulating debt that the country owes that it needs to pay off. Most of it is owned by Americans. Some of it is owned by foreigners, this debt. And so a few years back, the Congress passed, you're referring to PAYGO as the short term for it, the bird rules, that basically says if you're going to pass costs into the budget, something that's going to cost more money and make the debt bigger, then you have to cut something else so that it's a neutral spending. And some of the state legislatures are doing the same thing. They've copied that. And, and that's what's triggered by this. Social Security and Medicare are exempt from cuts under this PAYGO.
Okay.
But very important programs like Medicaid that pays for seniors in nursing homes, pays for children that are low income and need medical care, pays for people that have become disabled or maybe were even born disabled and can't work. Medicaid pays for their medical care. About 1 in every 7 Arizonans gets Medicaid. And we call it Access, and it's a very important program, and that's a program that's probably in the bullseye to be targeted, according to the head of the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan.
And it is also the program that, for the most part, pays for long-term care. So it really affects people, older people who are frail and possibly in need of help. It also affects programs such as commonly known as food stamps, which are not exempt, in which will hurt families, including energy assistance, a lot of vital programs.
Housing support.
Exactly.
Yeah, all that's targeted, that's in the budget. And if you can't cut Social Security and you can't cut Medicare and you pass a big tax cut that creates, a big deficit spending, then you're going to have to cut somewhere else. That fight is facing us.
So let me just ask to clarify. So you're saying I heard about a $25 billion potential cut to, is it Medicare or Medicaid?
That is a different type of cut to Medicare, which was passed in the bill. And the head of the Senate has assured one of the senators, Susan Collins from Maine, Mitch McConnell assured her that that cut would not happen. And that he also assured her that where PAYGO applied previously, it has never been invoked by the Congress. So there's some promises being made here that this will be painless, but we're sure not acting on that.
We have to go on break, but what typically happens when they cannot agree on the cuts?
Well, at this point, they don't have a budget for the federal government, and without a budget, the government shuts down.
Okay, so that's another issue that they're facing as a legislative priority.
And that's happened before, and the party that was in power, the next election came along, they lost power. So I think they're into preventing that from happening.
Got it. Thank you so much. We're going to go on our first break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. I'm your host, David Parra, along with Dan Martinez, Steve Jennings, and Lupe Solis. Let's come back to the subject of Legislative Priorities 2018, focusing first on the federal level. Those of us who try to stay on top of the issues also learned that the Social Security gave a raise, but then Medicare increased the premium. So, Lupe, would you share some information on that?
Well, it's about Social Security. Most of us Social Security beneficiaries received a 2% increase this year from the COLA. But if you will notice, in looking at your annual checks, at your monthly checks, you will notice that the Medicare premium went up. And in most cases, and for a lot of people, that really meant less in income because the 2% didn't begin to cover the premium upsurge that some, especially couples, received. So it's important to know that even as they debate the budget issues, and even as we have assurances that certain programs are exempt, when it really comes to the nitty-gritty, there's no assurances of anything, and promises are sometimes written in the wind.
Now, there is also something that just was released by CMS, and it says that they have approved that for Medicaid, Dan, they're going to be looking into how to install work requirements.
Exactly.
What is that?
Arizona is one of 10 states that's asked for that approval. And so each state is going to be given some guidelines to look at how they might require Medicaid recipients that are able to fulfill that requirement to actually work. So that's something that's coming down the pike that we need to be aware of, that people that are recipients need to be aware of, because each state can do things that are different. So be aware that that's happening.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, the federal government pays for most of access, and the state pays a share, and it's actually a good economic development tool for our economy here in Arizona. And the state's grown a lot because it's huge spending, and there are requirements. When the federal government pays for it, there's some strict requirements on how the money has to be spent. But states they're allowed to file what's called a waiver and ask that some of these strict federal requirements be waived. And the legislature for the last several years has required our department that runs Medicaid to file a waiver asking that Arizona can impose work requirements on the non-elderly and people that are able to work but that are getting access assistance. And every year the federal government has turned down Arizona's waiver to request that. Mm-hmm. It's granted other things under the waiver, but not that requirement. Well, with the new administration, Indiana was the first state to get approval to add a work requirement to Medicaid. And again, Arizona's applied for a work requirement. And as you say, David, the part of the federal government, CMS, that runs Medicaid, just brought out in the last couple of days that they would consider such and likely approve it if it was structured correctly. So I think you can see that's a likely thing coming at us in Arizona.
So the tax cut, the Social Security COLA increase, the Medicare Part B increase, work requirements potentially for Medicaid. These are some of the issues that they're dealing with. They have to pass a budget, which could eventually, potentially could trigger a government shutdown that we're just, paying attention to all these kinds of things. These are all the issues that they're dealing with in Congress currently.
If I may add to that, David, it's conceivable that the Congress will consider looking at Medicare to try to change it drastically and make it a voucher system where those of us that get Medicare for our health benefits would be given a specific amount of money that then we would take to go out into the private insurance market and buy our coverage. and that would change the program
That keeps
considerably.
coming up a lot, huh?
It does, and it's normally known as what it's a premium support program, and it is one of the favorites of our speaker in the House of Representatives. So it's something to look for and prevent as much as we can, because it certainly will not contain the same level of base benefits that we currently have under the program, and it likely, as Dan points out, end up costing more for most of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that idea is to limit the government's liability is what they're trying to do. So they would like to give everybody a check and say, hey, go find a private insurance company and it will sell you a policy that's like Medicare. But, you know, there's some wonderful things about Medicare. It's no matter how sick you get, it will keep paying. There's no caps or limits to it. It's administered incredibly efficiently compared to private insurance companies who spend upwards of 15 to some of them 30% on administration. Medicare's administration is in the single digits or even less. It's a great program for people, and to say we'll just give you a voucher and good luck with the insurance companies is, not as good a deal as people have currently.
Right.
If I may, David, let me personalize this and tell you a little story. You know, in AARP, we like the idea of telling personal stories. In our situation, my wife underwent a stroke and then suffered second and third degree burns and was hospitalized each time. The billing that we got was somewhere around $150,000 for doctors and hospitals, and we wound up paying several $100s, and the rest was taken care of by Medicare.
Right.
If we hadn't had that coverage, we would have been penniless. We would have to have sold our assets and paid those bills.
Yeah.
And not only that, but oftentimes the proponents of this program bake it on the basis of choice. You know, this would give people choice. They could go out and buy what they need or what they want. And granted, some people are quite healthy and maybe may not be using as much health care as others. But the point is that in Medicare, under Medicare, currently, we already have choice. We have traditional Medicare and we have private plans.
Medicare Advantage.
Medicare Advantage. So
Yeah.
it's certainly... I don't think that it's a good idea. And most Arizonans, by the way, through a survey that AARP conducted, I believe it was earlier last year, right, last year, definitely said they would not be for it.
The other thing that we skipped over when we talked about the tax bill that went through the Congress was, AARP lobbied very hard to keep something included as a deduction, which is the medical expense deduction. And that's, a deduction is something you can subtract from your income before you figure what part of your income is taxed.
On medical bills?
Yes,
Yeah.
and if they actually improved what was in the current code, which said that if your medical expenses exceeded 10% of your income, you could deduct those expenses above 10%. Well, that was kept in the tax bill, but it was lowered to 7.5%, which it had been for a number of years. And there's over 1 million Americans that take advantage of that. So that was a victory for
That was
AARP.
definitely a victory.
You may have seen the full-page ad in the Republic yesterday of AARP thanking Representatives McSally and Sinema for their support of that issue.
What I would like to do is just touch on one more issue, and then if you can tell us what are AARP priorities on all these issues at the federal level. And I would like just to say that, of course, there's the spending bill, and President Trump has talked about the infrastructure bill that it might be coming later on. But then caregiving. AARP has been advocating heavily for caregiving. Can you explain briefly what this is about and what is happening at the federal level with the caregiving subsidy that we're fighting for?
We call the caregivers. There are 34 million Americans. There's 800,000 and 804,000 in Arizona, people spending an hour or more a week to take care of an older relative. And we call it the great silent army of love that goes to work every morning, 24/7, 365. You don't hear much about it, but they provide more care than the spending that goes on at Walmart if you paid them about $11.50 an hour here in Arizona. So it's a huge thing. And federally, we asked the federal government if they would create a plan to better support family caregivers, figure out how we can keep people doing this longer, keeping their relatives out of tax-supported nursing homes longer, because caregiving is incredibly stressful and wears people out quickly. If anybody's ever done that, they'll know I'm making an understatement. They also spend around $7,000 out of their own pocket each year to take care of their loved one. And so federally, there's a bill to give caregivers, family caregivers, a $3,000 tax credit. We're also running a bill in the Arizona legislature, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, for a tax credit. And we've also just passed, the Congress passed, thank you, Congress, the RAISE Act, which is to create a federal plan to support family caregivers. That just went through, and we're looking forward to the president signing it.
Definitely.
And to bring it to the local level, by that I mean Arizona, it's important to note that people who are helping their loved ones are not only not sometimes, but most of the time helping with transportation, the doctor visits, dispensing of medication, and all sorts of things, but also financially. The survey that was conducted by AARP showed that 63% of them use their own finances to help out their loved ones. And they're affected in the manner that many of them have to change their work hours and sometimes their careers in order to do that, which also affects our economy because then families are suffering.
Yeah. You know, my wife and I are taking care of, not full-time, but on and off of our parents. And it, when you start doing that, it hits home. If you haven't done any caregiving, you kind of listen to it and it doesn't mean much. But the moment you start seeing your parents, get older and needing care, that becomes very important to you in a hurry. So before we go on the last break, so just very briefly, what are the priorities that AARP will take on this year at the federal level then? Would caregiving be one? Real brief.
Absolutely, it will be one, and we'll be pushing this tax credit for family caregivers. We're also, Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security are going to be very high priorities because the Speaker of the House has for years said that his number one priority is to reform entitlements. He likes to use that word. We call them benefits or things that you've earned. Remember, we've pretty much all paid upwards of 7 cents of every dollar we've ever earned into Social Security, and we should get every penny that's owed to us back. And so
Definitely.
we want to watch these reform proposals very closely.
Specifically, David, the AARP office sends at least a couple of us to Washington, D.C. for a lobby day where we will sit down with our congressional representatives and specify those areas that we're really concerned about, which are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and caregiving.
Thank you. You'll be very, very busy this year. We have to go on our second break. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We are addressing Legislative Priorities 2018. Way too many issues, way too important. We definitely have to be engaged in this process. We want to move now from federal issues to state issues, even though we kind of skip or miss a couple of items that we can mention them a little bit later on. But we want to move to the legislative priorities at the state level. And recently, our governor, Doug Ducey, here in Arizona, made the State of the State address. And we have David Lujan from the Arizona Children's Alliance, and we would like to get him engaged in our conversation, particularly what he feels the governor's speech missed and what are good things in it. So, David, good morning and welcome to our program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. So you are the Vice President of Arizona Children Alliance, and thank you again for making time to join our program. So what stood out to you and to your organization in the governor's speech regarding children's issues?
Well, I think his speech was similar to the speech he gave a year ago, in that he didn't offer any real big ideas that are going to really move the needle one way or the other. For example, education. Education has probably been one of the biggest issues at the legislature for the last few years. And like last year, he talked about how he was going to put a lot of funding into public education. And he mentioned that in his speech. And then the next day, the proposal that he put forward doesn't really move the needle much in terms of Arizona has cut more from our public schools since 2008 than any other state in the country. We've cut over $1.8 billion from our public schools. And some of that has been restored, but what Governor Ducey is proposing in terms of funding really only restores a very small amount, and would still put, even if it passes this session, Arizona schools would still have almost $1 billion less than they had a decade ago. Reasons why we're seeing a teacher shortage crisis and really seeing our schools struggling. So that I think is one of the biggest education issues, and unfortunately, his speech isn't going to change where we are right now too much.
And if I may add something, David, good morning. This is Lupe.
Good morning.
It's my understanding that even though they, and recently at an Arizona Chamber of Commerce legislative luncheon, there was quite a mention made of the progress that we've made in Arizona in education. But if I hear correctly, we have actually dropped to 50th in the amount of money of pay for teachers in the state. So there's no progress there. We're going down instead of up.
That's right. Back in 2008, we were 44th in the country in funding, and since that time, we've had, as I mentioned, the largest cuts to public education, and that's dropped us to the bottom. And, I think what Governor Ducey was referring to is our scores on the national NAEP test. We've shown improvements, but that's a testament to the job our schools are doing without the resources, and it's not sustainable. If we're not, although schools are doing a good job with the very few resources they have,
right.
We're seeing that through the teacher shortage crisis and other things that schools can't continue to operate that way. We need the funding to be able to help educate our students, our future workforce.
So, David, last question. How does what's happening in D.C. at the federal level impact children's issues here in Arizona?
Oh, I think there's a lot of ways, but one, I would say, of course, DACA. We have many students in Arizona that are impacted by DACA, and so that absolutely needs to be a priority of Congress. It's not just an issue for the DACA students. It's really, the strength of our economy and the strength of us as a state really is important in terms of addressing DACA and making sure that we're giving those students a pathway to citizenship. The other issue, though, at the federal level that I think is, with the tax cuts that we just saw, that those tax cuts created a $1.5 trillion deficit. And so the first step for many of the people who passed those tax cuts, they said, we're going to pass the tax cuts as step one, but then the step two is to then come through and cut a lot of programs.
Mm.
And so that's going to be things like Medicaid, Medicare, funding for schools, again, federal funding, Kids Care, which is our federal health insurance program that provides health insurance for a lot of low-income kids. So there's a lot of things at the federal level that we should be paying attention to.
Briefly, David, what's going on with the CHIP program at the federal level, which is our, the program, the Kids Care here in Arizona? What's going on with the funding on that?
Well, unfortunately, right now, nothing. I mean, the Kids Care here in Arizona, it's funded through CHIP, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program, and Congress needs to renew it.
Right.
And so we've been waiting, and it should be one of the top priorities, that they haven't done anything yet. We're hopeful that in the next couple of weeks, through the continuation of the government process that they're doing, that CHIP will be included, because there's thousands of kids around Arizona who depend on that for their health care.
David, thank you so very much. Thank you for joining our program. I really appreciate it. We'll continue the conversation and continue to reach out to Children Action Alliance for more input on these important issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
David, if I may weigh in on this. We know that our children have been shorted for any number of years in terms of funding, to the point that now we have teachers who are disillusioned with the profession. Many are dropping out even after having served in the classroom for a long time. They feel that it's a question of pay, but they also feel that they're disrespected in terms of how they are treated by our legislature and our governor. So that's a major hurdle that we have to overcome. We also have a lot of teachers that are in the classroom now that are not certified because we can't attract the right kind of people to teach our kids. And that's a problem that's going to affect not only our children, but our communities, our families, our state, and our economic development. So it's a huge issue. It's really important that K through 12 funding be stabilized.
Definitely. You know, before we continue the conversation here at the studio, we also are joined today by phone by Nubia Enriquez from Expect More Arizona, and I really wanted her to also provide some input on this important issue since they focus on education here in our state. Nubia, welcome to our show, and give us your perspectives about the budget issues with education.
So I think the biggest thing to consider right now is that we're taking a step in the right direction. I mean, the governor this time around has said that there's going to be a significant increase to the budget, and so we can't ignore that. It's significant in comparison to previous years. So it's, like I said, it's a step in the right direction. The only thing that we also have to acknowledge is that the education funding issue is not going to be fixed in a single year. We have to continue to push, and we have to continue to, mainly push the governor and the legislature to continue to increase funding for education.
Yeah, so do you see this? I assume it's both a priority issue and a funding issue?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And it's not always about money, and that's something that has to be thought about as well. But the fact that it's the fact that voters, it's a priority for voters. Education and education funding are a priority for voters. And then there's also a lot of organizations that are working and pushing for a better or more adequate education funding. It seems to be working. And that's one thing that we also have to be aware of, that the culture in Arizona is changing. People are understanding that education is important, not just for the kids that are going to school, but for the economy as a whole, which ultimately affects all of us. So I feel like the governor is also seeing that, and hopefully the people that represent us at the legislature also see that, because, again, it's an important issue, and they're going to have to act on it.
Yeah. Now, Expect More Arizona, what's going to be your focus in 2018 legislatively?
So we're going to continue to advocate for the things that we've been advocating for. We're going to continue to focus on our progress meter, making sure that the policies that come out of the legislature support the different things that are in the progress meter, including early learning, third grade reading, eighth grade math, high school graduation, post-high school enrollment, decreasing the number of disconnected youth, post-secondary attainment. So all of those things that we worked on, and that so many organizations and individuals worked on to figure out what we have to be measuring in terms of education, we're going to continue to advocate for those this year, because now that we have a blueprint, now that we know where we are on the state in terms of those 8 indicators, and we have goals for where we need to be in 2030, we need to continue to advocate for the same thing so that we can actually move the needle on these. So that's going to be, we're going to be prioritizing the things that are in the progress meter so that we can continue to see improvement.
Nubia, thank you so very much for joining. We will continue to reach out to you and Expect More Arizona as these things develop, and I'm sure they will. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you, and thank you for covering this important issue.
Thanks. Well, any comments on what's going on, with children's issues legislatively, with budgets, etc.? It's not an easy situation.
It's not. And I think that David brought up the issue of DACA. And as you well know, this is crucial right now because it's probably the right time to act, given that the budget, that some have said there will be no budget without a DACA program in approval. And we also need to think of it in terms of economic development because many of those students who are currently working will be unable to continue to work once their certifications expire. And it's affecting all of us. It's like I'm a very selfish person, I might say. When I look at education, I not only look at the benefit of my grandchildren and yours, but I also think about the benefit of the Social Security program, where it should be it will grow stronger the more educated, the higher paying level of those people coming into the system is. And if we continue to shortchange our children, as we have been doing for so many years, the economy of the state doesn't rest on service.
Yeah, and if
jobs, it should be higher tech and all those kinds of things.
Right. If there is a group that is like the right group to be here and to stay here and to continue to contribute to this economy, is the DACA students, the DACA recipients. They're educated for the most part. They already acculturated. They're here. They've been here since they were children. So I suppose we have to be hopeful that Congress will find a way to solve this matter.
And those of us that have been involved in some way, in any way or manner in this issue, will recognize that as we meet these young people, they're people you want in the state.
Definitely.
Their passion, their energy, their dedication to what they do, and many of them excel at what they do. And why are we going to throw away this asset that we have right now?
Right. We have to go on our last break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is our last segment of today's show, Legislative Priorities 2018. We have addressed issues at the federal level and also at the state level. I want to come back to you. You basically are advocates here at the state. You live and breathe these issues every day. And what are some of the issues that AARP is going to be involved in at the state level legislatively?
Well, we've got this huge boomer population that's, you hear 10,000 boomers a day are turning 65, and that's certainly happening in Arizona, which advertises itself as a retirement state. And there's lots of issues with that. And there are, a large percentage of the senior population is clustered right above the federal poverty level. There are poor older people, but there are also a lot of older people, a significant percentage that are not well off, but don't show up so much in the statistics. And, you have this aging network of government called Area Agencies on Aging around the state that provide services to people to help them stay in their homes, stay independent. And they have everywhere in the state waiting lists for important services, and some of these you've heard of, like Meals on Wheels. There's also services that do chore services for people, fix things around their homes, provide transportation to the doctor. These are essential services for isolated older people. It's been long established that people that are isolated get sick sooner and actually cost more for the people to treat them after they're sick than if you keep them healthy. So that's a big priority for us, is getting adequate funding and hopefully to eliminate those waiting lists statewide, which are more than 2,000 people at the moment are on waiting lists.
And just briefly, Steve, again, the caregiving bill. what is it that we're going to be doing?
We have a bill called the Family Caregivers Income Tax Credit that would provide, if you spent money out of your own pocket on taking care of a family member, and up to $2,000 a year, you could get $1,000 of that in a tax credit. And that bill's going to be heard this Wednesday in House Ways and Means. And it would make a real difference because, like we mentioned earlier, family caregivers spend, on average, $7,000 a year out of their own pocket. So this would delay burnout of family caregivers financially. At least it would reduce some of the financial stress of family caregiving.
Right. Apparently we have a call. Do we have a call, Ulises? Yeah. Let's go to the caller.
Hello, Mr. Barra.
Yes.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. And yourself?
You're doing great. All famous in the United States and Arizona. Hey, my congratulations to you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Is the way to do it, and wake up. Maybe need to wake up to some realities.
Yes.
To some realities, and the Congress is passing some laws that it's not like used to be.
Yeah.
But it's still a great country.
Thank you. Anyway, sorry that we couldn't hear you well, but people concerned.
The point
I
is
think
well
he got
made.
that point across, definitely.
The point is very well made. Thank you for making it, because that's exactly what we need, awareness. People need to be conscientious too, about what is going on in every level of government, not just there. And in fact, in the values that we hold dear, that they continue to be upheld. And in many cases, that's something that is being attacked right now. But the important part is that if we sit home and do nothing about everything, then nothing will change. It's up to us to make the changes that need to be made. It's up to us to stay informed. It's up to us to make known our wishes and desires. If you stay quiet, then things will not only continue as they are, they'll probably get worse.
Definitely.
What I might add, David, is that as citizens, we need to be engaging our elected officials. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. And sometimes they're not quite as responsive as we would hope them to be, but you need to keep calling them. You need to keep sending them emails if you can. Go down to the state capitol, arrange for a meeting to talk to them, because they do listen to folks when they have concerns.
And get to know who your representatives are. Many of us, if we are asked, we will not even know sometimes who the governor is, and that's shameful for two reasons. People who represent you live in your district. You can get to know who they are, where they shop, where they go. Get to know them. Get to know them on a personal basis, because that's what impacts. And it's amazing how people react when there is some pressure or when they know you. They know you as a person, not just as a complainer. So it's important to do that.
Definitely. Steve?
David, I had a legislator tell me what's kind of a joke, but it was also kind of deadly serious one time. And he said, every time they get a call on a bill, he says to himself, well, this is a nut that's all wound up about this bill. And so I got one call on it. Then the second call he gets on the same bill, he says, well, that's the nut's wife or neighbor. And then the third call, he said, that's the whole rest of the world is interested in this bill. So it is an issue of numbers. I had one legislator one time tell me that the most calls, this is years ago, that he ever got on a bill were 11 calls. And that to him, he voted against the bill, even though he was for it. Wait a minute. He voted for the bill even though he was against it, because if that many people called him, it was a big deal out there to the public. So
it makes a big difference if we engage or not.
It does, yeah.
It does. And in this day and age when it's so easy to do it electronically too, it's also important to remember that there's a certain etiquette to it. Attacking people is not the right way. Expressing your opinion about something is always the right way, and insisting that they understand, are you for or against an issue? But I had a legislator also tell me many years ago when we were mounting a campaign, and I forget what the issue was at the time, I got a phone call saying, stop the phone calls. They're hurting my telephone system. And I said, I didn't, we put out information out there. What people do with it is their choice. But obviously, if you're getting that many phone calls, you ought to listen, right? So it's impactful. It's impactful. And if you have access to even texting if you can find a phone number to do it to, but mostly emails. It's very effective.
Yes, all the legislators have smartphones now. So if you write them an email, they do see the email on their phone. As they'll at least see the title of the email. And, something Dan mentioned earlier that's very important is voting, too. I don't know if you noticed, but they just had an election in Virginia, way over on the East Coast, and it was a tie vote. If one more person had voted one way or the other, they had to draw a name out of the hat to decide who would be in the legislature. And that meant that one party controlled the legislature. It was the whole control of the legislature got down to one vote. Whatever legislator has the most legislature, whatever party has the most legislators in there controls the whole thing. So
let me read now what I typed that I paraphrased earlier on the show. Engage in the legislative and advocacy process or engaging is part of our democracy. It is our duty. It is clear that legislation shapes the life of a country and even the way people think and behave. What happens in Washington does not stay in Washington. So again, it is critical that we engage. And as we come to the close of this show, I wanted to basically ask you whether you see more Latino engagements, this is your bread and butter, very briefly, because we also want to make mention of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Yes, David, I think that Latinos are more engaged nowadays. They're running for school board positions. They're actively pursuing political positions. And I think the communication amongst Latinos is much better nowadays. So I'm hopeful that that will translate into more people registering to vote and actually voting, not only in the presidential election years, but in off years, because that determines a lot of what goes on in our state legislature.
Yes, Steve?
And school board members become city council members, and city council members become mayors, and mayors become state senators, and state senators become congressmen, and some of them become presidents. And that's the way you do it. And it's great to see people getting involved on the local level and beginning to work their way up that ladder.
Yeah, no doubt, negative things that happen sometimes trigger something positive as people becoming more engaged. As we come to the close, we just wanted to make sure that we mention that Martin Luther King Jr. Day is Monday, and this is a holiday, and there's a committee. And for more information on the committee that puts together events around here in Phoenix, at least around the MLK Day, it's azmlk.org. This is very important because this happens every year. These celebrations have been taking place for about 30 years in Phoenix. So this is very important, and the committee set up this website, azmlk.org, and people can go to this website to learn about what other activities are going to be taking place other than this Friday's MLK Awards and Scholarship Breakfast, which, by the way, was a very inspiring, as always is, breakfast.
And I think it's really important to remember that, especially in times of trouble, it's important to remember that what he stood for and his I have a dream continues to be or should be the goal of most of us, because it's only through equality and upholding of your rights and responsibilities that we become the citizens and we get the country that we need and want.
Councilwoman, Pastor, Laura Pastor was a co-chair of the committee that put together this event. So we're in it together. We need to continue, as they said in this book, believe in the dream. We have come to the end of our show. We trust that you enjoyed it, and that you will continue to join us in future shows. Have a great day. This was AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection.